Hey, how's your Substack going?
It's growing. I'm nearing 600 followers. Got some paid subscribers that are paying regularly, and uh, which makes it possible for me to keep doing it. And yeah, I've been doing the mission of God for the family. I think I just recorded the 37th
Did I see
one.
38 or was that
I
just
think I think 36 came out this morning. I
okay?
recorded 37th and scheduled it for tomorrow morning, and it's on raising kids. It's going through the promises of God for children, about our children, so that we can raise our kids by faith and not by works. And what do we mean? And so I have a sheet of all of these promises that I made for Aaron and I a long time ago, and
Oh,
I've been and then I other people have found it helpful too. I made it for us, and then as I've taught a number of times, I just have a PDF of it or print it out and hand it out. It's just a list of scriptures of what God says He promises to be to our children. So um,
dude.
I've fallen back on that a number of times regularly throughout our life, where you go, Lord, I'm out of my depth. I can't. Parenting is an impossible task, and but He promises to be with us, and that as He is to us, He will be He is a God to us. He'll be a God to our children.
Dude, could you send me that?
Yeah, yeah.
That'd be
I'm gonna
awesome.
I'm gonna just post it in the Substack tomorrow too.
Okay. I have to go check that out. Um man. How many promises are on there? Do you remember?
I mean, let's see, how many pages is it? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Pages.
Or no,
Pages.
this is I'm just counting the promises themselves.
Oh, okay. I was like, how many pages?
It's 3 pages long. That's about 35 promises, it looks like. And these are only the ones that are specific, that you can pull out of context, and it says this about your children. There's a lot that are, kind of general promises, or that are larger, implied. And I didn't put any. Well, I think there's one from the book of Proverbs, because you hear people all the time say, well, that's a proverb, not a promise. And so I didn't put those on there, just because that's not I don't think that's true. But then you don't have to. People will always focus on the thing they disagree on, rather than wanted people to be able to just be overwhelmed by God's gracious attitude towards our children. So that's just it's about 35 of them there.
All those promises, and you never found infant baptism in there, did you? Oh,
Did I?
yeah,
Are you
yeah,
asking?
yeah, yeah.
Of course, I found infant baptism in there. Um, there's a couple that I think are really, really interesting, that have to do with the way God tells us to teach our children to say "we" about the salvations of the past. So he tells us to teach our children to say, when we were saved out of Egypt, right?
Right.
That through the ritual of Passover, the reenactment of the Passover happens, and the children are taught that we are the ones that came through the Red Sea, right? They're taught that. So I think the rituals and the rites are always a reenactment, and an inclusion into a historical story, something that God has done. So I mean, I think it actually, it's what makes infant baptism make sense, that you would say, we were baptized in the Red Sea. So it's not, we're waiting around for it to be a description of something that has happened to you in the present in your life. It's something that God has done in the past. You're being grafted into that, included into that story through a rite, through a ritual. I mean, it's an understanding of the cosmos, an interconnectedness of people across generational historical boundaries. We always want to separate. We always want to atomize. We always want to think, when the Bible is always pulling us together across generational boundaries. And so I mean, there are promises on this list about grandchildren and great grandchildren, right? It's not God. Even when he starts talking about your children, he says your children and your children's children and your children's children's children, right? Like the grace of God pulls generations back together. So in a real sense, there's baptism is an inclusion in the new creation that was created out of water. It's an inclusion in the it's inclusion in the water in the wilderness. It's an inclusion in the Red Sea. It's an inclusion in the crossing of the Jordan, right? All of those times when God created and recreated his people by water, every baptism is you're being brought through the creational waters. You're being brought through the Red Sea. You're being brought through the Jordan. You're being brought through the Jordan again, right? You're being brought through, I think, even the John the Baptist's Jordan, right? You're being included in the baptism of Jesus. All of these things are brought together in baptism, and we want to parse everything apart and say, well, my baptism is a description of the experience of my conversion. I think it's that too. I don't think you have to say it's not that, right? But it's all of those things. But we don't speak the language of ritual anymore. We don't speak the language of rite because of the dehumanizing nature of the Enlightenment. We've been gutted of one of the most human forms of expression, which is ritual, which is rite. I've tried to think, what are the only real rites of passage we have left? Maybe getting a driver's license, maybe graduating high school. But a lot of these things, they don't give us access. I mean, and the reason is a rite would give us new access to something in the community that we didn't have before. So driver's license gives us access to freedom, access to the roads that we didn't have before.
21 years old, you get to finally drink your first.
Yeah, 21 years old. But almost all of those things are now separational rights.
Individual.
You turn 21, you go out with your friends. My daughter turned 21 and grandma and mom took her out for her first drink at a bar, which was really sweet because it became a multi-generational moment of, we want to be with you while you order your first drink, and so now, but that's because we're trying really hard to lean against all of the separational aspects, the generational separations. So yeah, but I think it's because of an attempt, right? When the whole world was seen as an allegorical, integrated allegorical, poetic revelation of who God is and who we are, then rites and rituals actually could communicate, could make sense. Now we say, well, the real thing happens in our head, and so it's at best a memorial. It reminds us of some truth, some word-based truth, but images don't communicate, and that's why modern art is so bad, because you have to have a description, and but most of the church's view of sacraments is that they are modern art.
Oh, you got to explain that one.
Well, because in modern art, you have an image, but modernists didn't believe images communicated anymore, and so you had to have a description of what the painting was. So you have a white canvas with a red splash on it, and then the description is, the blood that the bourgeoisie spreads its power with, something like that. And so because they don't believe the image itself could just truly communicate. And so it stopped being representational images, story-based images, because they didn't believe you could actually communicate with an image, that you had to have words connected to communicate. And so Tom Wolfe wrote a great book called The Painted Word about this, and he's not a Christian. He just was, at the time he wasn't a Christian, so he was just identifying that in pre-modern world they believed that images could truly communicate, and so you could paint an image and you could trust that people would see the image and it would communicate to them, it could move them, they would understand the story. But we had a lot more stories in common at the time. So you could paint an image of Venus de Milo and it would communicate to people, they would be moved. And that emotional move was a true communication from the artist to the one receiving the art. Well, moderns quit believing in, they separated image into a different sort of category than word. They separated emotion into a different sort of category than reason, and they said these are different things. And so just feeling, if I make you feel an emotion, it's manipulation, it's not real communication. But reason, and reason according to words, could be real communication. And so painting was all then just propaganda. It was all a power move, it was all manipulation. Any sort of image-based communication was that way. And so you could use it that way, but then you had to describe it if you wanted real communication. You had to attach words to it if you wanted it to be real communication. Well, as Christians, Jesus is the Word of God. He is the image of God. He is the true revelation of God all at once. Word, image, and communication all are pulled together in Christ. And so, and then all of this world is a reflection of him, is for him, through him, and to him. Mm-hmm. So we believe that images communicate. We know we do technically, theologically believe this, but the modern view of the sacraments as a mere memorial, I actually think it happened the other way around. I think the mere memorialist sacramental theology ended up causing modernism, but that's a whole nother
that's another way to say that the rivers of the church pushed out something. Right. But one way or the other, even if you don't believe that, I don't think there's any way to deny that our view of sacraments in the modern American church is the modernist view of art. And the way that we view the sacraments is just as a memorial, or
it's a memorial, right? It causes us to remember the words of God, right? But the important stuff that happens is what happens in our head, that in terms of the theological truths that are communicated. Whereas a traditional historical understanding is that the sacraments give us Christ, and they are an image. It includes words. It is a ritual to write. It's not a static thing. That the whole ritual is communicating, but it's also bringing us into the story. It's presenting us Christ truly. As a Calvinist, it's spiritually yet truly, right? It's by the power of the Holy Spirit. It's not it's not that the body of Christ, which is up in heaven, is brought down and handed to me, but by the power of the Holy Spirit, either we are brought up to Christ and he's communicated truly in the gift that he gives of bread and wine, that by the power of the Holy Spirit in a mystery, in a sacramental mystery, the Christ is truly communicated. The way John Calvin says it in one of his ecclesiastical letters. He says, God gives us the forgiveness of sin by mastication, which means by chewing. Right? We chew the forgiveness of sins. We chew and swallow the forgiveness of sins. Right? That wasn't something that was an odd way to put it. That was, it's a ritual. It's a rite where we are brought into the life of Christ. The life of Christ is given to us. Our sins are forgiven and taken away in this ritual, and there wasn't a threat to anything, because we weren't modernists. We didn't want to separate out and atomize everything, so it wasn't a threat. It was it was a different cosmology altogether.
Do you think this is our problem with being able to understand history too? Because we're disconnected from how images communicate. So then how we look at history, we find ourselves completely detached from it. We don't find ourselves being a part of it.
Right. Because we don't look at the story and think, well, how do I fit into this story? Where am I in this story? How is this my story? Right. We look at it and we want to turn it into either a moral lesson to learn, good or bad, or a way to show that I'm superior, or that they were superior. One way, whether if we're optimistic, the way I'm superior, if we're pessimistic, the way they were superior. That was the golden age. You see this with the way that we look at people in the Civil War. We look
I was
at
just
the people
going to go to more closely to us. Yeah.
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 You see people having what good faith debates at the time about what to do about slavery.
Yeah.
And we think that every single person that argued for a slow, let's say you have some Christian pastor who says, I think we should get rid of slavery in a slow way. And another one that says we should free all the slaves tomorrow. We look at that and say, oh, well, you've got the bad guy and the good guy, right? Or something like that. Like there's no, because we think of everything in terms of moral code and not in terms of story. We think in terms of.
I, for one, am for immediate release. I just want you to know that. I like whoever that is. I like that guy.
Yeah, as long as it involves as much murder as possible.
I'm just trying to get free, bro. I'm just trying to get free. So
I am personally ready to be re-freed. I would love to see the communism of the fascism and the communism of our country all dismantled.
Well,
I don't want a civil war to do it.
Well, yeah, I think though, and that's fair. I think, but there's a certain luxury that everybody gets to have, hindsight, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I have a certain luxury hindsight, but I couldn't imagine being in those situations and then having that argument in that moment and saying like, maybe next generation. Like that was at least the way where I'm at now. Yeah. There's no way I would have been like maybe 2 or 3 generations after. We'll get there. But looking where we currently are right now in our situation, being in the moment, there's some things that I think is going to take absolute generations to get out of, that I know there's no way we fix inflation in one presidential sitting.
Right.
It's impossible.
Yeah, it is.
Literally impossible.
I was thinking about the national debt too, the federal debt. You just literally couldn't pay that off in one generation. There's not enough cash to pay it off in one generation. But all I want is to stop going further into debt. I want to change the trajectory and then move the other direction. Let's pay down the national debt. But that's people freak out when you make an argument like that. You know, if we weren't in debt, things would be better.
I mean, that's a I'm just thinking about it in this terms of slavery and the context there. There was a reality that these people were in. Nate said something that I think when we had Dusty Devers out for a live show. He's like, everybody is where they're at because of their great grandparents or their grandparents. Nobody chose to be in the state that they were born in when they were born. You know, it was all based off of the decisions that their grandparents made, and they walked into that reality without being asked, you know, can I be born in New York or California or to these people in this sort of civic context, right? They didn't ask that. That's not their option. But their forefathers and their grandparents created the reason you were born in Chicago is because your grandparents had your mom and dad here, and your mom and dad made decisions to be here and marry each other. And so that's why you're here. And so you kind of get handed this reality that you get to contribute to, but that you didn't form, right? Like you didn't make that reality. That's not yours, but you get to contribute to it. And that's the historical narrative that I think we forget that we are in. There's a lot of those decisions that were made upstream from us that we are playing our part in that story of what's happened. And so, you know, it's thinking about like our forefathers are the ones, you know, during the time of slavery and the Civil War, they are dealing with a lot of things that have been handed to them in that context, in that moment. And so there's a lot of grace and a lot of patience that I think we need to look back to and say, okay, you know, who was dealing with those moments the best?
Right.
You know,
well, and I think that we also we have to get our categories for dealing with it from the scriptures too, and not from
absolutely from where our modern
So, you know, because there's the big debate right now going on in California about reparations, right?
Yep, that's right.
And in my mind, I was thinking, wait, I had to stop for a moment and thought, because they're arguing reparations because of slavery. I was like, wait, was California a slave state?
I don't think it was. It wasn't even part of the union at the time, was it?
Right. No. Yeah. So it was like, why is it that they're looking and saying that this government here needs to give me reparations for something that government over there did before this government existed?
Right.
So at that point, you're dealing in a different set of categories. So if you're in Alabama, Virginia, some place like that, I think you can have a rational, reasonable discussion about reparations because you're dealing with within the jurisdiction now of that governmental system. And but California, what that'd be like.
You might as well go to Alaska and ask them for reparations.
Yeah, like if you have Irish folks in Canada asking for reparations because they were enslaved in because of the time that they were enslaved in the Middle Ages in France, or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think France ever actually held slaves. Oh, have you seen the clip from who's the Korean? He's the Korean comedian. He's got a pretty funny
I've seen that
podcast.
one. Yeah, we never had
like,
slavery. 1,500 years, longest slavery ever.
Longest slavery ever.
We're not like you guys.
We're just not the kind of people that could ever do that.
The
longest active slave trade in recorded history.
And it's like, Korea. Maybe we all should be asking for reparations from those guys. Yeah,
from the Koreans. Yeah.
So part of so I don't think. Okay, man. Even I just want to say this. Even in places like Alabama or Virginia or wherever you found that there really was part of the slavery aspect of America, I don't trust any of them in this context to be able to have a rational conversation about reparations that is going to be judicious. at
Right.
all. I don't.
No,
I mean,
absolutely.
I just don't trust anybody there. It's all, especially since the conversation is even happening in California.
Right.
Like, what do you?
Well,
So
and that, I saw one guy arguing that he said, look, that thing over there was invented by a black person, so every white person that uses it should pay me 5%. I was like, what? Are you a descendant of him? Do you have any covenantal relationship to that guy? But he didn't, right? That wasn't what it was. It was, they have the same skin color. And so you owe me for what that guy did because that guy has the same skin color as me.
that's not gonna work in Africa.
It's just, but at that point, it's not, you're not dealing with you're not dealing in biblical categories anymore, because skin color is not a biblical category, right? Covenants are biblical categories. And so if you were if you were making an argument that you were the granddaughter of Aunt Jemima, and so Aunt Jemima syrup should continue paying out what they paid her to use her likeness to you because there's a covenant connection. I think now you're dealing in and I think that's
Tangibles.
The real reason they wanted to get rid of Aunt Jemima, is so that they could stop paying her family for use of her likeness. But that's a whole other thing. They're like, they want to because you just erase one more black person's IP from the conversation. But
if I can save, if I can save a bunch of money from doing that, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to tell you the real. I'm not going to tell you the real reason. My favorite color is green, and so I'm just going to tell you.
Yeah. No, it might be good capitalism, but it's
right. It doesn't have to be racism. It's just good capitalism at that point.
It is, but they also tried to make themselves look righteous.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
everybody's always trying to do in the market right now, and
because it's good capitalism to look righteous.
Because it's good capitalism, right? But they also probably are trying to get BlackRock money, so I don't trust them. Anyway, that's
point.
So, but I think that things like skin color are not biblical categories of connection. That there's an insanity that comes with that, because it's not even predictable. Generation to generation, one person's kids, or all of your kids aren't even all born with the same skin color from the same two parents, right? You just don't have that same kind of it's not a covenant connection. A covenant connection is a real connection, a connection between two people that have similar skin color that are in different places. They don't have a covenant connection, and so the connection is according to the flesh, is I think how Paul would put it. And we're not supposed to treat any man according to the flesh. We're supposed to treat them according to real covenant connections, which are real. And so it's not, we don't want to atomize the world into simple individuals, and we don't want to separate the generations, but we want to deal in real connections where the blessings and curses actually flow.
So I want to get to the Crusades, but because I think this is in the context of the conversation, and I've been watching this kind of spat go back online, and I realized I don't know enough about the Crusades to really even engage a conversation. But I do know there was a guy by the name of Peter Hammond. I met him a long time ago. He is a biblical Christian theonomist, also a missionary to parts of Africa, South Africa. He is a very well-known guy that we did work with him at Wretched. I really appreciate Peter Hammond. He's helped me a lot. He was the first person that I met that was very different than everybody else around the narrative of the Crusades, and was supportive. and said that the narrative that we've had in America, at least the modern evangelicals who always want to apologize for the Crusades, has no idea what was going on. So that was the first person that I heard kind of talking about the Crusades in that manner. But I want to, before I get there, I was wondering that you were talking about covenant connections. Do you think, as it relates to immigration, that we are having the discussion around immigration around the wrong context? Because I'm watching guys like David Platt come out and say, hey, you have these, no Christian should be rejecting the idea of refugees coming to their land, because that is an opportunity for the gospel to come and reach these people, and they're coming from a place where there is no gospel to hear the gospel. They're becoming your neighbors. And I line up way more on the other side. Not that I don't, this is really a Jesus juke and I don't like it.
Yeah.
But I line up probably more with Joel Webbin and the Right Response on X, where we have an absolute chaotic moment politically, historically, where we are opening and allowing people to run and ransack into our country without any legalization process happening, and then giving them all sorts of, I just saw a black lady in Chicago. Matter of fact, it was Anthony Bradley that posted it, a black lady in Chicago who is upset talking to her city council because all these immigrants, illegal immigrants, have come here, and all the funds and the money that was going to this community to sustain it for whatever reason is now getting turned out. But she wasn't even just making that her biggest complaint. She's just making the fact that the environment of where she lives is not safe. She can't enjoy it. It's overrun. And she's like, send them back, get them out of here, send them back home. I don't care, but this is not right how you treat your own people here in your state. And it's so funny because I feel like that's kind of been what my guy, Right Response, Joe Webb, has been saying. And I'm watching David Platt come out and say, what are you doing? This is a great opportunity. And I'm looking and I'm like, wait a second. There is an objective standard in law of how we get citizenship in America. We don't just bypass that and then jump to this other side. What happened to the judicious side of becoming a citizen? Because now, to me, you're not even being honest and fair to everyone who is standing in that citizenship line, who is trying to get in here legally because they want the kind of promises that America offers to its citizens that are not citizens now. They want that. But you're just allowing the mistreatment of those people, even, let alone the people who live in America. You're allowing the mistreatment of those people and saying being judicious, having justice, and being properly engaged in the system it doesn't matter. And so you're just throwing those people under the bus from their opportunities. And so it seems to me, though, that when we think about, and all this is to say is, like, when we think about covenant relation, somehow we've broken that reality all to try and establish something from the gospel that I think we're having, like, are we having two different conversations? What's missing here as relates to that?
Well, I think what it is it's the same thing where we're not using the categories that the Bible gives us. Because of the atomization, because of the disconnectedness of everything, so the word immigrant actually means somebody who's changed their citizenship. Right? So you're not an illegal immigrant. Doesn't make any sense. So an immigrant would be somebody that is, I'm from,
right.
I'm, let's say, from Colombia, and then I come and I apply for citizenship in America, and I'm either in the process of becoming a citizen, or I have, a temporary green card, which is a temporary citizenship, the ability to work and be a part of the system while I'm here, or I have changed my citizenship. An expatriate, so then they're an expatriate from of their place, and now a patriot of this place, or an immigrant. And then you've got refugee, who is somebody who is not becoming a citizen because they're in you're keeping them safe because their homeland has a problem, right? So a refugee is somebody that when things get better back there, they want to go back home. So they're not expatriating from their previous place, but they have a legal status as refugee while they're here. These are legal statuses. And then invader is what you call somebody who comes into your land to get your resources, either for themselves but aren't
Jason,
going to.
That is fantastic.
Become
Jason.
A citizen, right? So because we don't make legal distinctions, you've got Kamala Harris calling people immigrants who are invaders and saying they're the least likely people to commit crimes, because the legal category of immigrant actually is least likely to commit crimes, but then she's naming these other people
immigrants,
but they're actually invaders, right? So
that's really helpful, bro. Like, that is really helpful. And so we've lost the legal terms in order to refer. But if that's not an analogy for everything that's going on right now with us, we've lost the legal language. David Fowler has to be somewhere doing backflips because this is exactly what I think guys like him have been talking about. We've lost the legal language of marriage. So then we don't know what to do with kids. We don't understand the purpose of a wife or a husband as it relates to the actually being able to should be producing children, right? That's the goal of marriage. That's what it means, the protections, the roles. We've lost all the legal realities of those things. So then we don't have any idea of how to, that cleared up for me. I think now I need to start using those terms. What are we dealing with, right? Because Kamala, she's missed it. And she's like, well, she's not even labeling them the proper, because they're invaders because they didn't go about the legal realities to getting citizenship.
Well, and the citizens share, there's a certain wealth that is shared by all the citizens, the wealth that is common to all. So that's why sometimes some places are still called a commonwealth.
Yes.
And when somebody who is not a citizen comes in to take things that are the common wealth of the citizens, it's actually stealing, right? Now, if they become a citizen, then they get to share in that commonwealth.
Okay, can I pause you for a second? Because I think this even goes for not just nationally. We actually have this as it relates to state too, right? So, okay, got it. That's helpful. Because you got to get a driver's license. How long have you been here? Are you a citizen here? And where's your
right? Because your driver's license fee, in theory, it goes to upkeep the roads. You've been using the roads now for 2 years, but you haven't actually paid the fee to use the roads. That's reasonable, right? I actually I think there's a better way to do all that, but it's not an unreasonable way. I just think it's not the most efficient. Or
the proposition is valid. We just haven't done it properly.
Right. Yeah. So you've got that sort of thing, right? As a citizen of the United States of America, of the federal covenant, you have the right to move, right? The right to use the roads, the right of transportation, of unhindered transportation. That's one of the fundamental rights of the citizenship, of being a citizen of the federal covenant. But when you live in a particular place, then your right to use it has to do with paying for the upkeep of it, right? We've connected those things for a number of generations now. So, but the right to mobility actually is something that goes back to the common law. It goes back to the rights of an Englishman, right? The rights of it.
That's right.
So that's
if you're not an Englishman, you don't get those rights.
not when you're in England, right? Although there are certain things that by standing on English soil, they would make certain distinctions. When you're in England as a human being, there are certain rights you have, right? So even if you are not even if you're not a citizen, you still have a right to be treated according to the laws, right? I can't rob a non-citizen. They still have that right. But an invader who is there to rob doesn't have the same sorts of rights. And so this is, you see King Alfred having to work through these things with the Danelaws because they had these invaders who came. But then they say, but we actually don't really want to come back. Can we join you? So then he has to work through the legal ramifications and try to figure out what does it look like for the Danelaws to for these people to expatriate and become a part of us, right? What does that change of citizenship mean, and how does that work, and so this is it's not a new thing. But I mean, if you like Platt's argument, what was so ridiculous about it is one, it's this weird ahistorical just ignorance. So let's say you're a British Christian in 500, the Roman Empire has just fallen, and the Anglo-Saxons are just starting to show up on your shores and raid, right? They haven't moved in yet, but you've now had a generation of them showing up at your monasteries and stealing all of your stuff and burning your books. And David Platt's argument says, well, now they want to move in. How unchristian of you to not want this pirate to move in to come in and take your property, to take your house. It's like, well, no, these have been, this is an invader, right? This is an invader. You have to protect we have to protect ourselves from the Anglo-Saxons. If David Platt then argues, well, the Anglo-Saxons conquered you and then they became a Christian, don't you see that if you allow yourself to be conquered, that it's an opportunity to share the gospel? God using an evil thing that the thug kings, that the thug pirate kings of the Anglo-Saxons did in order to use it for good for them to end up becoming Christians, to argue that God used that bad thing they did for good, so you should let that bad thing happen, is an unchristian argument, because we are told by God to uphold law and order. So to say, well, hey, you should just let the law and order go. Why are you idolatrous about your law and order? Why are you holding so tightly to your law and order? Are you sure that's not an idol of yours?
Could you imagine him
Christian argument?
Could you imagine him telling me, slavery was so good for black people because ultimately so many of them became Christians. So you should just let it happen.
I've heard people try to make that argument. But God using a bad institution for his good purposes in the long run is not a good argument. I mean, that's the equivalent of, God uses I know somebody that was born out of an adulterous relationship, and I really like them, and so I'm gonna sleep with my neighbor's wife.
Yeah, God can use it. God used David, so
yeah,
we should just let's just find ourselves a Bathsheba.
Yeah, right.
No,
that's bad. That's bad moral reasoning.
So, so it's funny how all this is connected in one sense or another, because you see these categories, and so I think there are a lot of men, rightly so. We are going back and rediscovering historical realities. I think guys are doing what you're talking about. They are looking at where are we connected covenantally to who, and how do we then begin to apply that reality of our lineage to where we're at, right? I really think that's going on, and that's why I think there should be really, really good pushback against what Platt is doing, because he is ahistorical, and I don't think people see that. And do you connect that to Gnosticism?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, for a number of reasons. One, just being that he's acting like a Christian being a Christian somehow lifts you up above the fray of the day in, day out life of people that care about property.
Right.
The people that care about their nation, or people that care about their city. You know, we're above that. For us, it's just about souls getting converted. That's a Gnostic take, a Gnostic version of Christianity.
Would you just made me think about this. This is going to be interesting. Would you also levy that against guys who are, what do they call them? Who refuse to engage in violence at all? Like John Piper, I think, talked about this. Like if somebody broke into his house and the gun with his daughter or his family, and he had to shoot him, he don't know if he would because the guy isn't a Christian. Does that fall into that same category?
I think so. I mean, I think
because I'm seeing the same. That's the same sort of gap as we're above it all. The gospel is the most central thing, and so there's no real practical. It kind of guts out justice. You know, it guts out proper acting.
And I think it would make all your daughters hope they don't have a dad who's saved. Because suddenly it's bad news for your daughters for dad to get saved, right?
Oh,
you don't want that.
Jason, you know what you just made me think about? So then we can blame our current run. There's a run right now to guys like Andrew Tate and the Tate brothers and to Jordan Peterson and to Jocko and all these non-saved men who are masculine in the physical aspect of it. And there's a huge run for whatever they're selling away from Christianity in a lot of ways because of what you just said right there, right? Like because of that situation, because of that separation of, and what's getting a lot of people scared, I think, in the conversation around the Crusades is that there's a group of men that are rising up that are ready to be physical in that time, in that moment, to say, no, you can't have my land. No, you can't have my daughter. No, you can't have my people. You are an invader, and I'm willing to treat you like one if need be, right? And there's a fear of that reality, I think, coming because they're saying, wait, what about the gospel? Right?
Right. And I think, like, if you let's say, you know, you are sleeping and suddenly you're woken up with a gun in your face, and you're captured and you're dragged off, and now you're in prison, and you didn't see it coming, you weren't ready for it, whatever. And being a Christian should affect the way you live in prison, right? So that's true. That's a reality. But it should also affect the way you live when you're not captured. And I think there's a lot of captured mentality that the Christians have, that says, well, all of my heroes were really, really righteous while in prison. All of my heroes were really, really righteous. And so I want to, and we tell those stories, and there's really great, amazing stories about righteous men living when they were captured as slaves, when they were captured and made slaves, when they lived in galleys and when they lived after they were captured in prison. But we don't tell the stories of the righteous men that tried to free the prisoners. We don't tell, and we shy away from the stories of crusaders, and so we don't know what to do when not in prison, how to be righteous. We don't tell stories of chivalrous men anymore. Of chivalrous knights, chivalrous warriors, who fought, who were great who were great on the battlefield as well as great in the prayer closet. But those were the men that women knew they were safe with. The great Christian warriors, that was what marked them as chivalrous, is it was the ones that women knew they were safe around, because you had some incredibly strong warriors throughout history that were great on the battlefield, but they were also unsafe for women and children. What marked a Christian warrior was that he made the world safer for women and children, right? His strength made the world a place that women and children could thrive, that women could be feminine, and children could be children and grow up in safety. So I think we need to learn those stories, tell those stories, and become those kinds of men.
So the way that you look at the Crusades, super messy, well organized, good ultimately for Christendom, great model, bad. What's your, how do we, I'm not a historian, so this hasn't been, it's not often that Crusades are like a conversation of topic when you go hang out somewhere. But they used to be. I remember I used to think about it a whole lot. I think when I became Reformed in the beginning, I used to think about Crusades a lot, and I found moments that were interesting through there. But what are you starting the Crusades? Were they good?
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. There were 8 or 9 different Crusades, depending on who you talk to. It was a long period of history from, around 1100 to the middle of the 1500s, right? So when Columbus in 1492, when he left, one of the part of his reasoning had to do with a crusade, and what he knew was another crusade that was coming, right? So the crusade that had just ended, if you can make it around to the other side, and if you can convert the Asians on the other side, we'll have the Muslims surrounded, right? That Columbus makes that argument when he's trying to get money for his mission. So the Crusades were an ongoing thing, but I just to think about the very first crusade, I've been trying to think of what it would take to help people understand what the Crusades were and why. So imagine, you're over here in North Idaho or in Washington or in Oregon maybe, and you hear that Muslims have taken over Washington, D.C. Or maybe Plymouth, right? Muslims have conquered Plymouth, and now they have Washington, D.C. besieged, right? They've got a siege on Washington, D.C., and they're working from Plymouth Rock, and they have made Plymouth Rock their the base that they are going to fight from. Who is going to be motivated to go over and fight with them? Well, you're going to have a bunch of different groups, right? You're going to have Christians that say the Muslims have invaded. Let's say they were Canadian Muslims, just to make it interesting, right? You're going to have the Christians that say Muslims are invading and I need to go over and fight Muslims. You're going to have people that have family there, right? That say, well, I've got family over in that area. I need to go help free them, right? Go find out if they're safe. You're going to have people that love America, and they're going to say, Washington, D.C. is the capital of the country. We've got to go defend it, right? It's our capital city. You're going to have people that say Plymouth Rock. Well, that's where the Pilgrims landed. That is an important place in the way that we tell our story of who we are, right? That's the Plymouth Rock is the beating heart of religious freedom, right? That's our story. And then you're going to have people that say, oh, I've always wanted a chance to prove myself in war. Here's finally I can go fight. I've got all of these weapons that I've been hoarding, and I'm ready for a battle. And then you're going to have people that yeah. And then you're going to have people that say, I bet you get a big reward if you go and win. If you go free Washington, D.C., I'll be a hero. I'll be rich.
I'll never have to pay taxes again.
I'm going to never have to pay taxes again. Who's going to put you in jail after you freed Washington, D.C. from Canadian Muslim hordes? And then you're going to have people that say, well, I've taken a vow to uphold. I'm in the military. I've taken a vow. I'm going to go fight, right? So you're going to have lots of different kinds of people. Well, what happened was, so the fight, the Ottoman Empire begins to be established in the year 711. That's when you first have, I believe that was Charles Martel, where they begin to try and invade Spain, right? So they, you have Muhammad, who his uncle and then some of his nephews and then some of his children basically start going through and gathering an army. They gather an army through Africa. They gather an army through the Middle East, and then they attack Spain. And from 711 until September 11th, 1556, you have a fight for whether or not the Muslims are going to make it into Europe, right? They are turned back on September 11th. The reason that we were attacked on September 11th by the Muslims was because they remember that they lost the siege of Malta and that Malta was freed on September 11th. They are still fighting this battle, this same battle, and we are not. What happens is they conquer Jerusalem. Jerusalem at that time was mostly Christians, right? That whole area was mostly Christians, and some of the Christians are willing to just convert to Islam.
What time is this? What time are you talking about?
This is the 11th century, so it's a battle that happens for a couple hundred years, but they basically settled in 1050, somewhere around there. And then they turn and they start a siege on Constantinople. Constantinople is the capital of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is still around. The Roman Empire lasts until the 1800s. Constantinople is the capital of the Roman Empire. When you draw a map, when we draw a map we put America in the middle. Well, when they drew a map, even if you're drawing a map over in France or England, you still put Constantinople in the middle, right? That's the center of the world. Constantinople and Jerusalem are the heart and the belly button of the world. That's the center of the world. Well, Jerusalem, which had been a Christian city, falls, and the next thing they do is move towards Constantinople, and they besiege Constantinople. The emperor starts writing to all of the kings that are also Christians, saying, "We need your help." Right? All the princes. He writes to the Pope, but what the emperor doesn't understand is that in the West, we have a division between spiritual authorities and civic authorities, and so the Pope actually doesn't have an army at this point. 1054, you have the split between the East and the West theologically. Well, in 1098, 1099, you have the decision that even though we've had a theological split, they're still our brothers in Christ, and the ecclesiastical authority says, no, they're still Christians, and he actually lifts the ban on having communion together with the East for this moment. And so all of these four different kingdoms, princes, raise armies to go and defend the capital city of the empire. So some of them are in the empire, some of them are not in the empire, and some of them want into the empire, some of them don't, but they see that they're Christians. And then you also have what's called the People's Army, which is just a bunch of people who aren't in an army, they aren't in a civic army, but they want in on the war. Some of them
kind
are
of like the UN. Is that no? Okay.
Well,
yeah.
Not exactly like the UN. That'd be more like if if the Hells Angels said, "Hey, we're in on it."
Oh,
right?
The Crips and the Vice Lords and the Bloods and the Hells Angels.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, well, this is Washington D.C. We're going to go fight for it. And then you also have all of the traders that come along with it that are like, oh, well, I'll bring supplies. And then you have their families that come with them, because that's how you used to do war. You would besiege a city, and your family would live with you in a tent out there, and you wake up in the morning and you go to the siege front, and then you'd go home and you'd live with your family, right? It was like they brought their RV basically, and their family came with them in their RV, because battles weren't the way they are now. They weren't mechanized, so you weren't going to accidentally, your family wasn't going to accidentally get blown up or something, right? So your family came with you to battle. But then what had happened is shortly at that, so the Ottoman Empire had also, it had made it all the way up to the steppes of Russia, right? The Slavic areas. So you had Muslim Slavs. They really didn't convert many Slavic people because you couldn't drink alcohol as a Muslim, and they weren't willing to give up their vodka. And so the Christians said, you can drink vodka. The Muslims said you can't. And so the Slavs resisted Islam really well. And that's there's more to it than that. But
those
that
Slavs,
was part of it.
The Slavs are like, listen, at least from the natural revelation, we know this is good.
Right.
So
yeah.
That
how are you
has
going to make
bad.
it through a Russian winter without vodka? Right.
That's right. Exactly. Okay.
So, and then you also had a big group of Celts that had gotten converted to Islam, and they brought the Celtic warrior. They brought the Celtic warrior mindset, but also the Celtic machinery of war. It wasn't really machinery the way we think of it, but the good swords and the tactics, and the siege warfare. They brought that into Islam. They brought all of that Celtic expertise in war and technology into Islam, but they also so there was a philosophical mindset that the Muslims had that these Celts didn't. If you remember, the Celts were called by Julius Caesar, they were called the women from hell because they wore their hair really long, and they had no they didn't have any rules of warfare, so they did total war, and the Romans had to justify every war, and they had a philosophical mindset about war, and the Celts were completely emotional warriors. They would just come in and kill everything and destroy it all. They would cut the organs out of their defeated enemies and take bites just to show that they had defeated them completely. Is that kind of savagery. Well, the Muslim mindset, or the North African Islamic mindset, was much more philosophical. They had large libraries. There was an exchange program between the Muslim universities and the Christian universities in the late 900s, early 1000s. The Celtic Muslims had none of that. So when the Celts became Muslims, they were just a terrorist force. Very brutal. And they were the ones that showed up at Constantinople. So what happens is all of the Constantinople, they knew it wasn't going to last forever. So they gathered up the libraries, they hid them they hid the libraries, they snuck them out of the city, and the Christians, the first thing they did was save the libraries, and they sent them all throughout Europe. So you have in many ways, the Renaissance that ends up happening in Europe is because they took in as refugees the Greek the Greek half of the Roman Empire, they took in the refugees who ran with the libraries. And so that's why the Greek New Testament suddenly shows up on the scene in the West, and is a big part of the reason that you start getting translations, and it's a big help to the Reformation that you suddenly have the Greek New Testament, because you can compare it to the late Latin translations, which aren't very good. The early Latin translations were good. The late high medieval Latin translations weren't very good translations, because they were translations of the translations. And now you suddenly have the Greek New Testament. So, and you also have the Greek fathers. You get the first Greek people that end up joining the monasteries in the West, and a couple of them end up popes. They're the first ones that make papal supremacy arguments, because the East had a view of civic supremacy of the church. And, so you get this influx of a new mindset, a new linguistic categories, all sorts of new books, because Constantinople is falling. But they actually care about Constantinople and the Christian brothers there. And so they raise up these armies who it takes them 3 years to march from the West to get there. But they've brought all their families with them and everything as well. So they're in it for the long haul. And some of them are great warriors. Some of them are terrible. Some of them are there for, strictly religious reasons. Got to protect my Christian brothers and sisters. Some of them there for political reasons. Some of them are there for glory. But all of them are there because they know that if the Muslims take Constantinople, the same thing and if they take Malta in Spain, if they retain control of North Africa, right, that you're not going to get the continued spread of Christendom. So this is, at least this was in his the journals of Columbus. He talks about how Christendom has spread, but then it runs into Islam, that it has a difficult time overcoming it because of the philosophical monadism, monotheism, because of the way that it has been, that it converts by the sword, all of this. And so he says we've got to get these people surrounded, or we're never going to convert the rest of Africa. We're never going to be able to make it down and spread the gospel. So you've got these a lot of different motivations, but all of them understand that civilization is threatened, right? Civilization is threatened by the Ottoman Empire. Right, the Ottoman Empire they're a civic enemy. They're a religious enemy of the West, and not all of the West was Christian. But even the the pagans that were still existing in Christendom, they understood that they didn't get that same treatment from the Muslims, right? So you would even have
like Jordan Peterson or
right, right. So they're like, well, at this point, I'm a cultural Christian because I don't want the Muslims coming in. You think of like the library at Timbuktu, one of the greatest libraries in the history of the world. When the Muslims were getting close, when the Ottoman Empire was spread into Timbuktu, they had to hide it because they would burn libraries.
Time out.
Yeah.
There's a real place called Timbuktu?
Yeah, it's in Africa. It was one of the centers of civilization back in the great African imperial.
Well, I just, we used to make the jokes about all the way out in Timbuktu.
All the way out in Timbuktu. Yeah. That was like the edge, even of the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, wow. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's why we got the phrase. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
So you said there was a civic threat, a religious threat, and what else was it?
A civic threat, a religious threat, but then just a threat to the way of life, right? So
humanity,
you didn't have to convert. When the Muslims came through, you didn't have to convert to become a Muslim necessarily to stay alive, but they didn't allow you to share the gospel. So the Armenians were there were Armenian Christians living inside the Ottoman Empire. They couldn't spread the gospel to anyone but their own children. You couldn't, you would get killed, right? And it was this way. So Baghdad was the center of the Ottoman Empire. We basically, after World War I, we basically took a map and just divided out Iraq, Iran, Syria. We made them nations, but really they're all just a big, they're all kind of tribal groups that all exist there. They still don't really care about the lines that we drew on the map. But Baghdad was the center of the Ottoman Empire. They considered themselves to be the continued extension of Babylon, or the reestablishment of Babylon. And the Ottoman Empire stretched from Russia to Central Africa, into India, all the way to Spain. Right. It was enormous. It was incredibly powerful. The Crusaders were a ragtag group of some warriors, some non-warriors, who basically showed up at their doorstep and said, "We're here to free our people." Right. And our people meant these baptized Christians that are here, that are our people. And they won the First Crusade. They should not have been able to. And so they understood that God had given them the victory. Now, they eventually lost it again, but a lot of people ended up just moving in there and kind of living there. They took them 3 years to walk there. They weren't going to walk home. And so they ended up, kind of establishing different colonies there. And for the next 400 years or so, there was a fight over who was going to control that area. Were the Ottomans going to win it back, which they did, and then they would lose it, and then they would win it back, or were they going, or were the Christian West going to successfully defend it? They ended up having fights in Egypt. They ended up having fights in Spain over the Mediterranean, and up until the middle of the 1500s. So Queen Elizabeth the First is still talking about fights with Muslims. Martin Luther they're still having to prepare just in case the Muslims show up, right? That's how long the Crusades last. But it begins as a defensive battle. And then, you've got the Fourth Crusade was a disaster. It was probably not able to be justified in any sort of just war theory. But it was, and a lot of people died, and you have the theology of indulgences kind of developed out of that, or in the middle of that.
Is that to get people to go fight?
Yeah. So in exchange for going to fight, you're going to get indulgences for your sins and things. So that kind of and so you have some times and some moments where there's major problems. But the Crusades they began as a defensive battle, and they were necessary. You would not have Western civilization without them, right? It'd be like saying, like if somebody came along and they were like, "Oh, it would be unchristian to fight in the Revolutionary War." You can sit here and say that, but people did do it, and they did it so that you could sit here and say that, right? You wouldn't have Western civilization if it weren't for the bravery of the Crusaders to hold back the Muslim hordes that were advancing, who everybody believed to be unstoppable. Unless God intervenes, the Muslim hordes were unstoppable.
Are we go ahead. I want you to finish your thought there.
To say, the the Enlightenment came along and they tried to reframe the Crusades as this is the sort of thing that happens when you let religion run wild, and we need to separate religion from civic life, right? We need a Gnostic version of Christianity that separates religion from civic life and gives us a two-tiered understanding of knowledge, that you can have religious knowledge up here, but it doesn't affect the way you rule and reign and do things, because religion is what causes battles. Look at the Crusades, right? That was caused by religion. I would say that's the propaganda of secularists trying to get Christians out of the way so that they can do the things they want, like the slave trade, right? They want to engage. They want to start engaging in the slave trade. Christians are getting in the way. You have
really.
Yeah. So, man, one of the craziest things is if you read, who was the guy that argued against the slave trade in the House of Lords in England, or the House, the movie Amazing Grace was about him. And why is his name escaping me? He would go in and make arguments about, England.
Not Wilberforce.
Wilberforce. Yeah.
Okay,
Wilberforce. Okay. He was told that the civic sphere is no place for your religion. You need to leave your religion at the door to come in here and because we're dealing with politics, not religion, right? He was told those things in the 1800s, so it's not a new thing but it was because they would say, well, this is an economic issue, not a religious issue. Why are you making religious arguments? The same sort of thing you hear about abortion now, right? The same sorts of arguments. Leave your religion at the door. That's a two-tiered understanding. Francis Schaeffer is really good at explaining this, how you've got the two-tiered understanding that was developed in the Enlightenment, and it's a way of keeping Christianity from civic influence so that you can do the things you want to do. It's a Machiavellian argument. This is about power. Religion is about morals, right? Morals are individual. This is civic and corporate. You don't have a say here about how religion doesn't. You have to make different sorts of arguments than religious arguments. They used the Crusades, the retelling of the Crusades, as a lever to remove Christians from being able to speak into the civic sphere. So, but it was because they won the Crusades that they even existed to be able to make that argument. It's incredibly ungrateful of them to do that. So then you have a romantic retelling of the Crusades that enters back in with the Victorian age, because they had been so dislodged that they started to say, well, what does it even mean to be English, to be French, to be German during that era? And the Crusades come back into the imagination of people pretty significantly. But it wasn't, but it's hard to continue making that argument once you have bought into the two-tiered understanding of knowledge that the Enlightenment brought.
So really break down that two-tier understanding of knowledge.
Yeah. So the person who settles it into that argument is Immanuel Kant. And what he says is there's two kinds of knowledge: noumenal knowledge and phenomenal knowledge. Phenomenal knowledge has to do with the things that you can gather from your senses, right? The phenomena that you see, hear, taste, touch around you, right? So scientific knowledge is another name that it was given. It was knowledge of phenomenon, and that works according to certain laws and certain rules. And then noumenal knowledge is things that you can't get to that way. So and the three things that he put in that category are truth, beauty, and goodness.
So pneuma is coming from the translation of spirit. Is that
spirit? Exactly. Yes. So, so it's spiritual knowledge would be probably a better translation into English, right? Spiritual knowledge. So, and that it has to be either revealed to us, but once it's revealed to us, it has to be kept in its category of morals, ideas. You could hold to those ideas, but they don't have to do with the phenomena of normal life, right? So you've got spiritual knowledge and you have temporal knowledge, right? Knowledge of the way the world works. And the two are different kinds of knowledge. And so they don't affect one another. So how you live your day-to-day life, you have to live it according to the rules of temporal knowledge, and then you can live your spiritual life whatever way you want, right? Whatever you think in your head, that
it kind of sounds like Francis Schaeffer too. It has what Francis Schaeffer talks about in his book, right? The two different tiers.
Yep, the two different tiers of knowledge. So, and there were guys like Heyman, who was a Christian at the time, who made really good arguments against Kant. Like but he lost in the long run. But he was kind of the father of German Romanticism. So German Romanticism ends up pushing back against the rationalism of Kant, and that's why you get this kind of Victorian age. The German Romantics were Christians. The English Romantics picked up on the Romanticism, but didn't bring the Christianity with them, except for the Irish. The Irish Romantics were all Christians, but so English Romanticism wasn't a Christian movement, but German Romanticism really was a Christian pushback against the rationalism. But it ultimately fails because it ends up buying into the two-tiered knowledge. What it says is just that the phenomenal knowledge is the most important, is more important than the noumenal knowledge is more important than the phenomenal.
Yeah.
Whereas the rationalists say that the phenomenal knowledge is, but really it's a switch, it's a change in cosmology. So it's the same time that you have the new cosmology being introduced, where the whole thing runs on physics, and the sky is the sky is repitched or repitched in the sense of like putting up a tent, as a series of as just merely balls of flaming gas moving in the sky, that sort of thing, right? They redo the cosmos as a giant clock, right? And so then you can argue about whether or not there's a clock maker, but it runs like a machine. It runs according to phenomenal laws. It runs according to just natural laws, which is what they called them, which is this is why the word this is when the word nature shifted its meaning from having to do with its metaphysical reality to where it fits into the clockwork, the machine of the whole. So it's a significant shift and a change into a new way of seeing the world run. So the world runs on physical properties, physical laws, so the laws of nature. I mean, the phrase law of nature shifts from the law of nature having to do with making sure that you're using everything according to what it's for, right? So if I find something, what's the proper use of it? That would be, obeying the law of a thing's nature, versus the laws of nature being the forces that make the machine work, make the clock tick. Did that make sense?
No, it does. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this like 3 or 4 times to really get that saturated in my head. But because we've had so many other conversations around this topic, I feel like I can put a lot of that together. So then, do you think our conversation right now around the Crusades is still dealing with that reality?
Well, I think what it is,
because the Kantianistic understanding and as well, because I really do think there is kind of a boots on the ground movement that understands that lady out there in Chicago who is pushing back. against having the illegal immigrants. I think I saw a post that I thought was super radical of the idol that's being built. Was it in Texas? This huge demon-looking idol. Have you seen that?
Yeah. I can't remember. It was a Hindu temple that had built a giant golden statue. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just kind of like, yo, if you don't see, and those are being erected in America, right?
In Texas.
I thought in Texas. I'm like, if you don't know what time it is, like, this is not just a mental ascent moment. This is about to get crazy, right? Unless we say, oh, we are officially captured, come out with your hands up and just walk on and let them put you in. I mean, that's where I feel like we're really at. And it feels, I mean, I'm not saying that we're hopeless, because there's still out there, but boy, when we start seeing that is an invading religion.
Right.
Like, that is not good to see idols erected in a place that's supposedly Christian.
And when you say, and I think what it is when you say, hey, we should do something about that, and you have immediately a whole group of people say, well, hey, we're not crusaders around here. Don't go getting violent. What it does is it causes everyone, it causes people that want to do something about it to say, well, why do you always say no when it's time to do something?
Right.
Why do you keep saying no? But there's now, if the conversation is, yes, we should do something, what do you think we should do? And you have a conversation around what's the right way to do it, then I think you're actually moving things forward. But if it's, okay, don't go getting crazy, you young people, I don't want you messing with my retirement, which is what young people hear, then you're not really of any use. And you might be buying into that Kantian, like, upper story, lower story view of things. If your response is, we shouldn't do anything at all, or even if it's, well, our response should be, let's all make a post together on the internet.
What about the response that Platt has kind of pushed out, which is like, hey, this is a great opportunity for gospel sharing because it's right here in your backyard and God's brought them here to share the gospel?
So I think the reality is everything is an opportunity for sharing the gospel. So people like Platt that aren't already sharing the gospel with their neighbors aren't going to suddenly start sharing it with the neighbors that speak a different language. So
interesting.
I think, of course, whoever God puts in front, I mean, if going to prison is a great opportunity to share the gospel,
Right.
Getting arrested, getting captured in war is a great opportunity to share the gospel too. So that shouldn't mean that we say we should try and figure out how to do that.
This is a split between the civil, the religious, and the humanity, right? Like the human side. Everybody's thinking one-sided.
Yeah, exactly. As if those are two separate things. We don't have, if the gospel is deep in our bones, it will flow out of us no matter what, right? It'll flow out of us if we're standing before, standing before the firing squad. It'll flow out of us if we're, having a barbecue with our neighbors across the street, right? The gospel will flow out of us.
Or if we're hacking down idols that are raising themselves up in our city halls.
Right. And so the city hall one, I think, is a good example, because the city hall is the common space of all people, right? So if you come in and you say, we're going to put up a Baphomet idol or whatever that thing was, and a guy says, well, I'm a citizen here, I'm going to tear it down, right? We're how that, I think, is as a completely reasonable
We shouldn't even second guess that one. Like, no one should have ever second guessed that. It was like, duh.
And if the guy gets arrested and goes to jail for it, he should do it cheerfully, and all of that, right?
And we shouldn't let him just go in there and not push back.
Well, I don't remember all of the details of the situation, but because I actually don't even, that sort of disappeared from the.
They dropped
news.
the charges.
Did they?
Okay. Yeah. All the charges and everything got dropped. Yeah.
Right. So I don't think, but when somebody says, well, hey, we got to uphold law and order in that sort of situation and leave that thing up, but then they don't want to uphold law and order when you're being invaded. It's just hard for me to take them seriously. Like, are you a law and order? Is it about law and order or not? Or is this really about you not wanting to, you wanting to be seen by the left in a certain way?
Right. I think some do. I think some are afraid of the we've been so soft that radicalization doesn't bother me as much as I think it does a lot of other people, right? Like I wish 20 years ago we had men who were like, no, we're not going down that road. Your social justice bullcrap is not, we're not going down there. We're going to use standards, biblical law, but we've been manipulated so much that there's the pendulum is swinging, I think, a little more to the way more conservative, way more seeing the problem, way more willing to engage. And I think that bothers some people, that where's the end at, because some of the goal of the people who are kind of playing the social cards is, how can I radicalize everybody and make them fight? Because in the end, it'll blow out the middle, right? And so I need the leftists to be as radicalized over here. I need the right to be as radicalized over that way, so that they come together and that they fight and blow out the middle. And then when it's all said and done, we have what we want.
Right. Well, that's a populist tactic, which I don't think is biblical.
No.
But it is a populist tactic, and I totally get it. It's similar to the libertarians, where I think, I get what you're saying. I also don't think that this is biblical, because I do think God has established real authorities in the world. And this is where I think Calvin's doctrine of the lesser magistrate is so important. Because when it comes to when it comes to a lot of these resistances, a populist uprising, depending on the laws of that particular place, may or may not be the right thing to do, right? If you may actually need to fight for a change of law in a particular area, but it might be the sort of thing, where you just need to get everybody out in the street, holding hands around somebody's house that is that they want to arrest, right? Where you say, if you're going to arrest him, you got to arrest us all. Those sorts of because what you don't want is a throwing off of true God ordained authority. So there are times when the proper tactic is nonviolent, and times when it's violent, right? There's a time when it is the wrong thing to do to refuse to engage with force. Like if you see a little old lady getting mugged on the side of the road, and you don't pull over and grab the tire iron,
I can't trust you.
Then you aren't engaging the way you ought to in that situation, right? The right thing to do is to engage with force. But then there's other times when it's the wrong thing to do, when you have an authority overstepping its bounds is most effectively resisted by another authority, if that makes sense. Throughout history, we see this. It's most effectively resisted by another authority. If there is no other authority, that's where the nonviolent populist resistance has been the most effective. So it's it's a tactics issue, where a tyranny ought to be resisted, but there's a right and proper and effective way to resist tyranny and a wrong way. You know, when the government tells the church you can't meet, there are times throughout history when they've met in secret and it was the right and effective way, and there were times when they refused to meet in secret, when they said we're going to meet in public and make you arrest us, right? That was right and effective. So all of the tactics should be on the table and discussed. What's causing problems right now is the separation between the older men who are supposed to be wise and know all the tactics and understand the times, directing the strength of the younger men. That's not happening. So that's
because why isn't that happening? Has the decay of the disconnectedness of the past separated father and son, old and new?
Yeah,
like
I think
how do you, because we got to get that back if we're going to start, because I think that it's fair to say we are in the middle of being overrun. I have no question. I have no question about that. Our lack of submitting to God, our idolatry have demons and their kingdoms at our gates. There's no question about it. So,
well, here's one of the things that I found really interesting in studying the Crusades is that when the armies showed up to free Jerusalem, one of the things that happened was they had hoped that the people within Jerusalem would rise up from within, but they discovered that they had been disarmed. They had been disarmed for one generation. And so you had an entire generation that didn't know how to resist because they had been raised in a disarmed society. I think you see.
Okay, COVID was a complete evidence of that, right? COVID was like no one knew what to do because they had been so disarmed over the last 100 years of education. Right?
Yeah, and there's a reason too that places, that you have, was it Denver, Colorado? Was that where you had that the gang come in and take over a neighborhood?
No, that was in are you talking about Chaz?
No, that was in Seattle.
Yeah.
But no, the one that was just recent where you had
I don't know about this.
A gang move in and basically take over kind of this whole area. It was one of the cities where the push to disarm had been highest. So, and I think what happened, I don't know this for sure, but you look around and you think, well, they went through a lot of areas to get where they went. The bad guys know what areas have been disarmed because it's happening in public. You saw this in New Orleans when there was after the it doesn't happen every time, but often after a big storm comes through, a hurricane, the police will go around and use it as an emergency excuse to disarm people. They come in and they say, well, emergency powers have been enacted because of the hurricane and we're taking all the guns, right? So they will go disarm whole neighborhoods. And
Aurora,
they used
Colorado.
It was Colorado.
Yeah. Taking control of several apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. This incident has raised concerns about the safety of residents, particularly newly arrived migrants from Venezuela. Oh, man. Oh, those people probably would love to have some Crusaders right about now.
Right. And, there's a rumor that the Hells Angels are all on their way there to go free the neighborhood.
But, okay, can we use this?
That makes me sad that that's who we have to depend on.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask, because that goes right back to what you were just saying. Okay, so lesser magistrates. These guys have SWAT teams. We've given them all sorts of money and budgets to come in here and to take care of situations almost exactly like the ones we've militarized our police. So how is it that now a militarized police is not willing to go in and protect us after we've given them so much money and budget, and we're having to depend on the gangsters to come in and now free us from our oppressors?
See, this is what happened in East LA in the 90s, if you remember.
Yeah,
it was a similar sort of thing. Actually, I'm not recommending the TV show Snowfall unless you're a colorist or an editor, and then you have to watch it. But the TV show Snowfall is about the 80s and in Compton, I believe, and the rise of gangs in order to protect from the CIA. That the gangs had
People
to actually
forgot about that.
Yeah, they actually had to come together in order to protect their neighborhoods from the CIA trying to introduce crack cocaine in order to fund overseas work that the CIA was doing. It's evil stuff. I want JFK to be put in charge, JFK Jr. or RFK Jr. to be put in charge of all of that, which is just amazing watching him dismantle it all.
So before we run real quick, go ahead. Were you going to deal with like kind of how that should, when you don't have a lesser magistrate, they're not engaging. That is your stuff, your property. So you have some authority in that environment.
Yeah. So with that, like with Aurora, Colorado, that's an example of the magistrate is not doing its job of protecting you. So you're not being attacked by the magistrate. You need a lesser magistrate when you're being attacked by the magistrate.
Got it. That's helpful.
When you're being attacked by an invader, then you have the biblical right to defend yourself, and to defend yourself and your property, because it's not just yours, it's also the property of the next generation. So you're not just defending your own property in that situation, you're defending your children and your children's property. But a
magistrate should be involved in that situation, right?
Yes.
But if they are not, you have the freedom to go ahead and engage with that moment. Even before they get involved, you can engage with that moment, couldn't you?
Right. Yeah. So the right to self-defense is well established by Christians for generations. They have showed for generations that you have a right to self-defense, and we have one legally. Now, depending on where you are, there's still places where, and this is a communist tactic. This is actually a communist tactic that they wrote about, that when somebody defends themselves, if you arrest them, that it will demoralize a people to the point where they won't defend themselves anymore, and then they can be taken over without violence, right? So you can accomplish a non-violent revolution according to communist tactics by arresting anyone that defends themselves, because you throw them so morally off balance that then they won't know what to do, and then you can just show up one day and say, hey, we're in charge now, and you can have. So it was in their tactics for bloodless revolution. So when they arrest somebody that defends themselves, that's a communist tactic, and we just need to fight that in the courts with our teeth and claws.
And as much as financial support with those kind of things as we can muster. So then, okay, I would have no problem for the owners of the complex and the people in the community to hire guns and men to come in and to get out through physical force if they have to, these people who have invaded them. I would have no problem with that, and I would say they would be just in doing so. No problem whatsoever. And they don't have to offer a gospel message while they're outside before they charge in. Without any equivocation, they can say, listen, we're going to give you 1 day to evacuate. If you're here tomorrow at this time, either we're carrying you out in a body bag or you're running. That's the options you have, right?
Right.
Okay, so I've watched. So when you see that, when you don't have order from your magistrate who is going to engage that way, you're going to create a chaotic environment as a nation. That's just horrible. As a leader, right? I've also seen this reality happen online where you have guys who are going after pedophiles because the law enforcement won't do it.
Yeah.
And so I saw one the other day where a guy went after one and got shot in a Target going after this pedophile. And there's many videos where some of these guys have gone after these pedophiles. They get there, they end up talking to them, they smack them, they kind of beat them up and say, "Don't you ever come back and do that." I saw one the other day, guy would set up something for in a hotel and walked in there with a paint gun, blasting the dude. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this guy needs to be going through a particular court case and then tried for murder, for the death penalty, right? That's what he should, because that is unacceptable if found guilty. And so we have this lack of justice. Go ahead.
Do you remember that one though, where the guy he would catch him, he would put all the evidence together, and then he'd call the cops, and then he ended up being the one that got in trouble, and so that's the reason that they don't call the cops anymore,
because they're the ones that are going to end up. They're going to find the boy with a system like that. Who needs a friend? Right, the enemies are all you need a lot of friends. I mean, you don't need an enemy anymore. The system is your enemy.
So, you had a guy that he did that, and then the guy shot himself, and then he got sued and lost, because he caused this guy to kill himself. It was like, no, the police showed up, and the guy shot himself because he knew that he was guilty, and that's what happened. But the guy that called the cops on the guy was the one, he ended up getting sued, right? So when you live in that sort of situation, people start getting creative to protect themselves and their communities and their siblings. And
there is a massive separation between our Christian theology and the practical application of that theology. Massive. I mean, this is, I fear what a lot of our young men are seeing is the need to want to do something to engage, but they're kind of like, I'm not going to learn it from you.
Yeah, right. I mean, they're going to, if Christians aren't spending their time studying tactics, they'll get their tactics someplace else.
We got to continue to talk about this, because maybe we need to talk about even tactics more so, even from where we're at. But I still kind of, I still kind of want to go through the conversation around the Crusades. Isn't the conversation really people are having around the Crusades, is it?
No, I think it's really a debate about, does my Christianity touch the ground? Like, does my Christianity touch grass, or does it not? Right? Is it is it real, or is it not? And but see, here's the thing: is Machen's book Christianity and Liberalism is about this topic. Right. He saw modernism coming into the mainline denominations or the Presbyterian Church, and he said, hey, that's a different religion. That's Gnosticism. That's liberalism is a different religion. And what a lot of the American church did was make peace with liberalism by giving up certain areas, but keeping what they considered to be the fundamentals, right? We'll keep the fundamentals, but we'll give up the cosmology. We'll keep the fundamentals, but we'll give up the understanding of civics, right? We'll allow you to define the understanding of civics, right? They gave up certain things, and to liberalism, and tried to keep the ability to confess with our mouth, as long as we didn't, go out and change society.
And so then you don't have, when it's time and you're getting overrun by invaders, you don't have a black robe regiment anymore to tell you, here's where it's time to go. I'm going to finish preaching, and then we're going to go fight.
Right. And this is always this is the sort of thing that I always wonder, because when somebody says you had people preaching before they went into battle, and how could you possibly preach people into battle? Well, do you want them to go in without a sermon? I don't understand. we do. Well, but war is a secular sphere thing, right? It's a phenomenal sphere thing. It runs on those rules and laws, and there might be moral limitations that you want to put on it from the phenomenal or from the noumenal world, from the upper story, but it runs on a different set of rules altogether in a modernist understanding or an Enlightenment understanding. And they just didn't have that. They didn't see any conflict with their Christianity actually getting out there and transforming the world.
How do they?
And it was a world. I mean, and I think that the reality is, a lot of Christians that would oppose the Crusades would be okay with World War II.
I don't. No, we're not doing it. You have. Oof. That's they. Would they be okay with what David did with war and battle too? Then, or no? Especially looking in Samuel, because
I mean, a lot of them, they know that they have to say yes.
They have to take that. Yeah,
love the Bible and all of that. So I don't think. I think it really is that they have bought into the narrative of the Enlightenment retelling of the Middle Ages. I mean, even calling it the Middle Ages means it was the time between the Enlightenment of the ancient world and the Enlightenment of the post-Christian era. You have the light and then the relighting of that ancient wisdom that was post, and because a lot of the Enlightenment people, they predicted that Christianity would be gone. You've got some really funny ones, like one of the great Enlightenment philosophers, Voltaire. He said, within a generation, Christianity will be a thing of the past, and we will have moved into an era of great rationalism. His house is now the International Bible Society's office, which I just love. So you've got a lot of things like that. The Enlightenment really thought that Christianity was on its last leg, and the era of Christian superstition, as they called it, is over. But really, the medieval was the least superstitious era of Europe's history. The Enlightenment reintroduced